Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 7th of 2024, and currently we have a pretty small slight risk for portions of southern Illinois, southeastern Missouri, far western Tennessee, and northeastern Arkansas there, as well as a marginal threat that extends from southern Illinois into northern Louisiana and eastern Texas. This is probably going to be the main concern that we're going to go over in today's forecast. We also do have a marginal threat for Iowa into portions of Illinois there, into the Mississippi River. However, I will likely not really be covering that marginal threat up north really all that much, but we could see the potential for some more scattered to isolated severe thunderstorms up there. And then taking a look at our risks for today, we do have a 5% tornado risk for the slight risk area, as well as a 2% tornado risk for the marginal threat further up north. We do have the 2% tornado risk that doesn't extend all the way into Texas, but it does extend into northern Louisiana and southern Illinois there. And then for our damaging wind risk, we do have a 5% damaging wind risk that does extend for the entirety of both severe threats for today. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 15% hail risk for the slight risk region, but we don't really have all that much of a hail risk for the risk further up north. For tomorrow, we do have an enhanced risk for southern Oklahoma into northern Texas there, with a pretty big slight risk and a pretty big marginal threat that extends into portions of western Alabama and western Tennessee. Something I do want to note about this is the path of totality for the solar eclipse does go right through this, and the solar eclipse is tomorrow. So a lot of people are traveling down to Texas, like places like Dallas and Austin, to view the solar eclipse for tomorrow. However, that may definitely become quite dangerous, especially with the risk for severe thunderstorms that we have for today. So it's going to be a very, very big concern for tomorrow, and anyone that is traveling down here, you guys will need to be staying weather alert for the potential of some dangerous severe thunderstorms, some of which could potentially be significant. Threats for tomorrow do include a pretty large 5% tornado risk for the eastern half of that slight risk area into Louisiana, sorry. And then for damaging wind risk, we do have a 15% damaging wind risk that does extend for southern Oklahoma, northern Texas, southern Arkansas, and northern Louisiana, as well as a 30% hail risk with the potential for some massive hailstones for that enhanced risk area, and that's going to be the primary driver for the enhanced risk for tomorrow. And then for day 3 outlook, we do have a very large slight risk that will likely be upgraded to an enhanced risk by tomorrow, or at least by the time this does roll around to our day 1 outlook. And we do have a 15% with the hash area for our probabilistic combined risk for severe thunderstorms, so we could definitely be watching for the potential of some significant severe thunderstorms. And then for day 4 to day 8 outlook, we do have a slight risk that does extend across the Dixie states for eastern Texas, southern Arkansas, the entirety of Louisiana, almost the entirety of Mississippi, the southern half of Alabama, in the Florida Panhandle on our day 4 outlook. And then our day 5 outlook, we do have a 15% that extends across the southern half of the eastern seaboard for northern Florida, southern Georgia, South Carolina, and southern North Carolina there, where we are watching for the potential of maybe some significant severe thunderstorms. So we definitely have a pretty big week ahead of us. Taking a look at our WBC outlook, starting off with our excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we don't really have anywhere that we're watching for the potential of some flash flooding. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for southern Arkansas, parts of southeastern Oklahoma, northern Louisiana, and northeastern Texas there, where we could be watching for the potential of some scattered flash flooding. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a moderate risk for flash flooding for southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, into parts of eastern Texas there for the Arklatex area. So we could definitely see the potential of some widespread and potentially some significant flash flooding on our day 3 outlook, which we are watching for April 9th into April 10th. And then for our winter weather outlooks for today, we aren't really watching for anywhere that's going to see a massive winter storm, but we could see some heavy snowfall for some regions of the Rockies there, where we could see some heavy snowfall in some of the elevated regions of the Rockies. And then for day 2 outlook for tomorrow, again, a lot of the same thing, some elevated heavy snowfall for some of the Rockies there. And then for our day 3 outlook, still, again, a lot of the same thing. In fact, it doesn't even look like we'll see really all that much of a risk for heavy snowfall for our day 3 outlook. So yeah, we're not really looking at really all that much of a risk for snowfall across the United States this week. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations. Let's start off with our surface observations first and how that's going to trigger the risk for severe thunderstorms. As of right now, we are looking at a warm sector that barely extends into Iowa there. We do have a surface low that does position itself across northern Nebraska there with an occluded front that is a combination of the cold front extending down into Missouri, Arkansas, that is likely pushed eastward into more central and eastern Arkansas and Missouri as storms are currently working their way into this region and firing. And we do have a little bit of a dry line along this warm front here, as well as most notably ahead of the cold front there. We do have a little bit of a dry line, and storms are expected to fire off that cold front dry line combination and work in conjunction with that with the 500 millibar jet streak that is currently positioned across this region. You can really tell that we're going to have a quite beefy 500 millibar jet streak, and that's going to support the risk for severe thunderstorms with 500 millibar flow upwards of 100 to the upper 90 miles per hour, which is definitely going to supply us with quite a lot of speed here. We could definitely see a hail risk out of that, and that should definitely really support the risk for severe thunderstorms backing that dry line in that cold front. However, we are looking at kind of more of a more limited risk for the up north, which is expected. Because it does look like the warm sector is going to struggle to get that far north, and storms may be firing mainly off that occluded front, which is going to be a severely limiting factor for storms up north. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low-level jet and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we kind of have, again, two areas that we are watching for the potential of tornadoes. One further down south with the 5% tornado risk, where we are expected to see a pretty strong low-level jet here, upwards of 40 miles per hour, which is definitely going to provide us with quite a lot of directional shear, and that will definitely be supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region, potentially a couple of tornadoes. And then for our 2% tornado risk further up north, we do have a little bit of a smaller low-level jet and a weaker low-level jet, which is rounding the base of that surface low further off to the north, and that is also going to supply the region with some directional shear that may be able to support a lower end risk for tornadoes, but we could definitely see the potential, maybe one or two brief tornadoes across this region with that low level jet that's going to be getting upwards of 30 to the low 40 miles per hour, which again will definitely supply us with quite a lot of directional shear. We could definitely see a tornado risk for both locations. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect the risk for not only our speed shear but also our defluence and the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Following our wind vectors, you can see in the north we do have wind vectors that are turning out into the north from out of the west here, and then further down south we do have mostly zonal flow into the out of the west here. So we definitely have some quite notable defluence and spreading of those wind vectors, which should create a void in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and what that will do is that will cause our mid levels and our low levels to rise up and fill that void, and that's how we get widespread synoptic lift. So we could definitely see a pretty big aiding factor from that. Plus, we also do have a pretty strong upper level jet here as well, with 200 millibar flow that may be able to get upwards of 150, 140 knots. So we could definitely see quite a lot of speed shear, and that will definitely support the potential for hail across this region. Taking a look at our directional shear and how that's going to support the risk for tornadoes across this region. Again, we do have a pretty decent low-level jet across this region, so we are bound to see some pretty decent directional shear. And for the first couple of hours, as storms move into the 5% tornado risk, we are expected to see some pretty decent directional shear ahead of storms upwards of 300 to potentially a pocket of 400 meters squared to second squared of storm relative helicity across this region. And that will definitely be supportive of the potential for tornadoes, and the low-level jet will continue to increase as the night goes on. However, instability will be on a decrease as the night goes on, so it will kind of balance out, and we won't really see too much of a tornado risk outside of that 5% tornado risk. But we should see a directional shear that may be able to get upwards of 400 to potentially 500 meters squared to second squared as it moves into middle Tennessee, and that will support maybe a low-end tornado risk, because we will have weaker end instability and lower end surface instability as the sun sets. And then further up north, again, we are expected to see some pretty decent storm relative velocity values with that other low-level jet rounding the base of that surface low, with values that may be able to get upwards of 200 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity for that 2% tornado risk. So we could definitely see maybe a risk for some for an isolated tornado or two. But again, you have to think about the fact that we are going off an occluded front, and the warm sector is having a hard time reaching that far north. So we're going to see much more limited instability and overall much more limited risk for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear with our instability in our unshaded contours here and how that's going to affect our hail risk across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent bulk shear values across this region with speed shear values that may be able to get upwards of 40 to 50 knots of bulk shear across this region, which will definitely be supportive of a favorably sheared environment for the potential of some scattered hail across the slight risk area and potentially some isolated large hail for the rest of the 5% tornado risk. So we could definitely, again, see the potential for some hail that may potentially be pretty large, but it definitely shouldn't be too large. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, I do want to go over our timing as well as some general radar analysis before we get into our environment for our storms and how that's going to affect our instability. So starting off with the northern marginal threat, we currently do have some storms that are ongoing back into northwestern Iowa and in South Dakota there. In fact, the SPC did just extend that marginal threat up into the region where storms are currently ongoing, but we are expected to see the potential of some more scattered to more isolated storms across the marginal threat area along that occluded front. Those are probably going to begin developing across the marginal threat area and move into the marginal threat area anywhere from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. and then should move out of the region for a quick break around 7 p.m. and then you guys may be able to get another round of at least rain showers with maybe a small severe risk. However, I doubt we'll really see too much of a severe risk with that second round that you're seeing here, but that should move into the marginal threat area around 7 to 8 p.m. and then move out of the region and maybe leave some more isolated lingering rain showers into the overnight hours into the early morning of tomorrow. And then for the slight risk area, which is the main area that we are covering, we do have some rain showers that are currently ongoing, and they are mainly outside the marginal threat and they are outside the slight risk area, and we are expected to continue to see some upscale growth as these storms continue to move into the region. And it does look like we may be able to get more of a isolated mode to more of a scattered mode. If we get more of an isolated mode, that will be overall more favorable for the potential of tornadoes across this region, and we could definitely see again the potential for maybe a couple of tornadoes for that slight risk area. However, it does look like it may become pretty messy pretty quickly as it moves out of the slight risk area into Kentucky and into Middle Tennessee. However, again, it does look like we may get another round of storms that may fire off along the cold front further down to the south that may be able to begin around 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Further down south, and that still may be able to support a little bit of a risk for some tornadoes and maybe the risk for some hail as well. But you guys may definitely be able to see 2 rounds of storms across this area into the late afternoon and the early evening hours of the early morning hours of tomorrow. Taking a look at our dew points, mainly focusing on the slight risk region further down south, we are expected to see that combination of that cold front and that dry line as I was talking about, and we are expected to see some pretty decent moisture that may be able to get upwards of the low to potentially the mid 60s across this region. However, the warm sector is hardly able to extend into Iowa. It does look like we are going to have a little bit of moisture set in place across this region. However, it is going to be extremely limited along that occluded front, with dew point values that may be able to range upwards of the low 50s to the upper 40s, which is overall going to support some very limited instability up north. But we could definitely see some fairly decent instability for the warm sector further down to the south. We should definitely see some pretty favorable dew points further down to the south. Taking a look at our temperatures, starting off with the marginal threat in the slight risk region further down to the south, we are expected to see some pretty decent heat across this area, with temperatures that may be able to get upwards of the upper 70s and maybe the low 80s across this region, which alongside our very decent dew points of the mid and low 60s, we could definitely see some pretty decent instability across this region, which will definitely be fairly supportive of the potential for damaging wind gusts, mainly tornadoes and hail. However, as time goes on and the sun sets, as storms move out of the slight risk area and into the marginal threat area, we are expected to see a significant drop in temperatures as the sun sets, and temperatures may drop into the mid to low 60s, may be able to get into the upper 60s and maybe a low 70, but overall it will lead to basically none surface instability as storms move into central Tennessee there, and will rapidly decrease the risk for severe thunderstorms. And then for that second round, it's going to be very limited as far as our storms, because it does look like our storms are going to be firing in a very unconducive environment and much more limited instability, and we may be able to see a little bit more elevated storms with temperatures that are going to be getting upwards of the mid to upper 60s, and with it being nighttime and more convective inhibition being in place, that's going to support less surface instability and likely more elevated storms on that second round, which will probably be more of a damaging wind risk and more of a hail risk, and we may see very limited tornado potential with that second round. But we could definitely see the potential for tornadoes for the first round that is going to move into the slight risk area around 5 p.m. And then for the marginal threat further up north, we're going to see some fairly decent dew points. Again, it's going to follow the same pattern as when the sun sets. It's going to be significantly colder and lead to more elevated storms and less of a tornado potential. But when storms do fire, we're going to see some decent temperatures, upwards of the upper 60s, which should support some fairly decent instability. But with our weak moisture, we're going to see, again, very limited instability across this region. Taking a look at our lapse rates on pivotal weather and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for hail across this region, it does look like our lapse rates are going to be fairly limited. Our storm line is going to be around here, indicated by this black line I just drew, and it's honestly kind of hard to tell if our storms are going to be right up against this area of decent lapse rates, or if it's just going to be a little bit behind. So overall, it's kind of hard to tell how our lapse rates are going to affect our instability based on that factor, how far back it is from our region of best lapse rates. But if our storms are along the region of best lapse rates, with lapse rates upwards of the mid 7s and maybe approaching a low 8 there for southern Tennessee, we could definitely see quite a lot of instability aid come out of that, as well as increase the risk for hail across this region and support overall more robust updrafts. However, if our storms are not along the lapse rate line, it will likely lead to a more limited instability and a more limited risk for hail across this region. But regardless, we should still see quite a lot of instability come out of this, even if our storms that are indicated by that line I drew aren't along our lapse rates area. As our decent lapse rates move through this area, it may lead to overall a more destabilized environment and more instability that may linger behind our best lapse rates, but honestly, it is quite hard to tell. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures as well as our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our instability and the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Off the bat, it does look like we are expected to see some pretty limited convective inhibition across this region. That will likely lead to an uncapped warm sector, and likely won't really lead to any instability that's going to build up with the cap in place. And by the time, or if we were to have a cap, by the time that cap were to break, we would have bigger instability values. However, with the lack of a cap, but still a pretty conducive environment, we are still going to see some pretty decent instability values, but we just won't have the aid from that convective inhibition. And that will likely lead to potentially some more rain showers and more renegade storms that may fire off ahead of the dry line in the cold front that may be in the open warm sector, which may potentially be mainly a little bit more limiting to our severe thunderstorms that are rooted along that cold front and along the dry line. But we will have to wait to see when our storms actually do move into this region. We see more upscale growth. However, further up to the north, we are going to have again a lot of the same thing with pretty much no convective inhibition across the occluded front, which is likely going to do the same thing further down south. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to affect our storms overall with regards of our surface instability, which we will look at later. Starting off the slight risk area, we are expected to see quite a lot of instability across this region at our most unstable level. We are expected to see instability values that may be able to get upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram, and the entire warm sector will likely see cape values that are probably going to range anywhere from the 1,000s to the upper 1,000s in the low 2,000s, which will definitely be more than enough to fuel the potential for a couple of tornadoes across the slight risk area and that 5% tornado risk area. With regards of our surface-based cape, which we will look at, because we will need surface-based cape for the potential of tornadoes across this region. However, we will also likely be able to see the potential for some large hail across the slight risk region, as well as the potential for some isolated damaging wind gusts for the entire marginal threat area, including that slight risk area. And then further up to the north, again, as I was mentioning previously, we are going to see much more limited instability, with instability values along the occluded front that may be able to get upwards of the upper triple digits, which is going to fuel the potential of those more marginal severe thunderstorms, but still may be able to fuel the potential of one or two brief tornadoes, the potential for some isolated damaging wind gusts, but we aren't really going to be seeing all that much of a hail risk for this region. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have much to say about this, but it does look like the majority of our most unstable cape is translating down to our surface as well. So we are going to see a very conducive surface instability, which will lead to surface-based storms and the potential for tornadoes across this region, alongside our other risks such as large hail and damaging wind gusts. And the same goes for further up north, where our most unstable cape will translate down to our surface, and that will support the potential for for an isolated tornado or two. And then for that second round that I was mentioning, it does look like our storms are going to be firing off in a region that is going to be seeing surface instability. However, the sun is going to be setting, so I'm not really too sure the quality of that surface instability, but it does look like our surface instability will be there, and it still may be able to support the potential of some surface-based storms and maybe a tornado risk across this region. However, I do think our main tornado risk is probably going to be with that first round further up to the north. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Starting off with a slight risk area, we are expected to see a pocket of some very strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability, which will definitely support and aid quite a lot in the potential for tornadoes across this region, especially with the directional shear that we have in place. We could, again, definitely see the potential of a couple of tornadoes with the storms that we're going to see across this region, and that very conducive 0 to 3 kilometer instability will definitely be quite a major help. And the same goes for further up north. We are also expected to see some pretty strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability along that occluded front, upwards of 200 to the upper 100 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer instability, which should definitely aid in a tornado risk quite a lot across this region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values, starting off with the 5% tornado risk for the slight risk area, we are expected to see some pretty decent energy helicity index values across the entire cold front here for the entire 2% tornado risk. In the 5% tornado risk, in fact, I do think that we may be able to see the 2% tornado risk potentially extend into Texas there, because we are expected to see some pretty decent and conducive instability extend into Texas, as well as the low-level jet extended into Texas, which may be able to support an isolated tornado risk down into Texas as well. But overall, we are expected to see some pretty decent and widespread energy intensity index values that are going to be getting upwards of the 2s and potentially be approaching the 3s, which will definitely be pretty conducive of the potential of a couple of tornadoes for that 5% tornado risk area, as well as the potential for an isolated tornado or two for that 2% tornado risk area. And then further up north, we are expected to see some spotty low-end energy intensity index values for that 2% tornado risk to the north, which is in line with what most 2% tornado risks look like. So we could definitely see the potential for an isolated tornado or two further up north as well. Taking a look at our 10-meter wind gusts and how that's going to affect the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, we are expected to see, again, mainly a 5% damaging wind gust risk for the region of concern, further down to the south. However, I do think that we could have potentially had a slight risk for damaging wind gusts for that slight risk area, 15%, because models are indicating that we may be able to see some scattered damaging wind gusts with some of the storms for that slight risk area that may be able to get upwards of 40 to potentially 50 miles per hour, but probably going to be around 40 miles per hour across that slight risk area. And then further up to the north, we are expected to see the potential for damaging wind gusts that are going to be pretty isolated, that are probably going to be mainly around 30 miles per hour for the 5% damaging wind gust risk further up to the north. Taking a look at our meso-analysis page and our large hail parameter and how that's going to show the risk for some scattered large hail for that 15% hail risk across the slight risk area, we do have some large hail parameter values that are getting upwards of 6, but then we can also take a look at our significant hail parameter and how that's also going to show the risk for hail across this area. And we do have a 20% that does extend further down to the south from the slight risk area into Arkansas, northern Mississippi, and the Memphis region of Tennessee, which is indicating the potential for some scattered large hail across the slight risk area, but it will likely be further down to the south. So we will watch for a hail risk potentially further down to the south, indicated by our meso-analysis, but our meso-analysis models are indicating that we should see the potential for some scattered large hail across this region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are JaxonWX. He does make storm chasing content, One Nation Weather, which does make pretty digestible and more suited for the average viewer, because I make overall more in-depth content. So I highly suggest you check out his channel. And then Weather Watcher does forecasts for not only Europe but also America, if you are interested in that. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast. Oh, and something I do want to mention is that something is coming in the mail. I am getting a boom arm for my microphone, so hopefully the quality of my microphone will sound much better. Been experimenting with microphone placement, as you can tell by the last couple of videos. The overall quality of my microphone has sounded much better. That's as a result of me moving it closer to my face. So hopefully that boom arm should make that a permanent fix. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.